Okay, here we go. We have an essay on section E, control procedures. There are 4 questions in this essay type, and as usual you have 30 minutes to complete. So let us read the detailed case study by pressing next. Here we go. We have the detailed case study. As usual, you can zoom in, zoom out. I think this is the perfect size that will help us read the whole text comfortably. This one. ACE Contractors is a large regional general contractor. It's a contracting company. As the company grew, Eddie Lee was hired as a controller. The person who is responsible for financial records keeping is called a corporate controller. Eddie Lee was hired as a controller and was tasked with analyzing the monthly income statements and reconciling all the accounts formerly handled by Susan Zhao. Who was she? She was the sole accounting associate formerly. Lee, the new controller, noticed a large amount of demolition expense for February. Demolition means you destroy certain facilities, raise them to ground and construct a new structure. So Lee noticed a large amount of demolition expense for February, even though no new projects had started over the past few months. And why such a huge amount of demolition expenses was paid? Since Lee did not expect such a large amount of demolition expense, he was worried, and none of this type of expense was budgeted. It wasn't budgeted, it wasn't planned. How come we spent a lot of money on demolition? Lee dug a little deeper. He went further deeper into the details to ascertain what kind of expense it was. Isn't it like reading a good, interesting story or something like that? He found that all of those expenses that were incurred were actually bank transfers into another bank account. So instead of finding some supporting documents for expenses of demolition, what he found was just bank transfers. So instead of finding debit demolition expense credit bank, what he found that it was a transfer to some other account crediting the bank of the company. So these were the bank transfers. After additional research, it became evident that Zhao, the former accounting associate, had been transferring funds out of the company bank account into her own account. Wallahi, haram haza. Then recording fake expenses to make the bank account reconciliation work. That's what she has been doing. Why it was possible? When a person who is responsible to authorize a transaction, he has also access to accounting records, this will happen. That is the reason there has to be segregation of duties. While the president kept the pre-numbered checks locked up, pre-numbered checks, they are always like that. Whenever you receive a checkbook from the bank, the checks are pre-numbered, pre-printed. So kept the pre-numbered check locked up, that's a good control, until checks run time. So checkbooks are tightly controlled. They are pre-numbered as usual, as all checkbooks are, and they are issued only when the checks are to be issued to the suppliers and are signed all of the outgoing checks. He was unaware of the ability to initiate transfers via the internet. So there was a good control. The checkbook was controlled, locked up, but this is the world of IT. You don't need a checkbook to transfer funds from one account to another. E-banking, mobile banking, internet banking is all over the world. So this has happened because he didn't know, the president didn't know that e-transactions were taking place. He was unaware of the ability to initiate transfers via the internet. Lee had also reviewed the bank reconciliation. Lee, the new appointee, the new controller, which were completed by the office manager. And this fraud was not evident since the ending balance was reasonable, what it should be. So there's nothing came out because no one knew what was happening. It was all made possible because Susan Zhao was able to initiate a transaction and she was the one recording it, so she could hide them because she was doing 2 incompatible jobs. That's the reason there has to be proper segregation of duties. So let us see what are the questions, the kind of questions being asked. Moving on to the question side now. Here we go. Question number 1, part A. Identify and explain the 4 types of functional responsibilities that should be segregated properly. Those who have studied with FTC, I'm sure all of you are aware that there are 4 functional responsibilities that must be segregated. And if you remember, those who studied with FTC, that we can memorize with this mnemonic CARR. These are the 4 functional responsibilities that must be kept separate. The C stands for custody. It must be with someone else. Custody of certain asset that has resulted from a transaction. The authority to execute a transaction must be with someone else. So authority to execute a transaction must be with B. For example, if custody is with A, then authorization of that transaction which has resulted in an asset must be with B. Record keeping of that asset must be with someone C. And finally, the most crucial one, reconciliation of the recorded asset and with the physical asset. This reconciliation must be done by someone else. The last part, reconciliation, should be done by someone totally unrelated to ABC. It should be someone X, for example. So what was the case in the given scenario is that a person who was able to authorize a transaction was also able to record the transaction. So that's the reason he was able or she was able to manipulate. Authority and record keeping must be segregated. So the question requires identify and explain 4 types of functional responsibilities that could be segregated. That is custody, authorization, recording, and reconciliation. Let us type it in right here. A. You write A and then you type in your responses. So the following are the 4 types of functional responsibilities that should be performed by different people within the organization. First, authority. If you remember CARR, so it could be in any order. Authority to execute transaction should be with someone else. B. Record keeping of such transactions must be with someone else. C. Custody of the asset that has resulted from this transaction. Custody of assets. And finally D, the last one, is periodic reconciliation. So these are the 4 functional responsibilities that must be segregated. That is the basis that's a basis preventive control for a good system of internal accounting control. B, the second part of the question. Identify and explain 2 incompatible duties Zhao possessed that allowed her to take company funds. Clearly, it was all there. She was able to initiate the transaction and she was the one recording that we have already discussed. So, Zhao, the lady who was committed a fraud, Zhao could execute transactions by initiating the bank transfer and could record transactions, excuse me for these spelling errors, record transactions by entering false or fake or erroneous joint ventures or expenses, whatever the information you want to give. There she was entering wrong information. So this is how you respond specifically to what is needed as per the requirement of the question. So the question 1 is over. Now you can press question 2 and then type in your responses. So this is the progress bar as you keep on completing your questions. Since you have done your question number 1, which is a 1 out of 4, so 25% has been completed. Now you click question 2 and do the next question. Identify and explain 2 ways that the company had attempted to safeguard its assets. What assets? Only the checkbook that was tightly locked, and the checks were issued only when they were needed to be printed for the payment to the suppliers. That's what I could see. Identify and explain 2 ways that the company had attempted to safeguard its assets and suggest 2 ways to strengthen controls in this area. So let us type in our responses. The following are the company's attempted controls. One, the company had physical control over their checks. They were tightly locked. The company had physical controls over their checkbooks. Tightly locked. 2, the president authorized and signed all checks. That's a good control. 3rd, the company maintained pre-numbered checks in stock. That is the usual case. The checks book are always pre-printed. It's not something that company has done. The company maintained pre-numbered, this is the suggested answer by the way, numbered check stock. And 4th, we had the budgets in place that compared the actual expenses or actual revenues with the budgeted number. So it's a good control. Budgeting is a control as well. The company had a prepared budget to compare to actual costs to identify the variances. And that's the first part of your response. You have to also recommend, suggest ways to strengthen controls in this area. Since 2 was required, I've given 4 as per the suggested answer. So now ways to strengthen internal controls include the following. Strengthen. No such function on the real exam. Spell errors will remain. First, what we can do? The controls. The first control we can implement is that we can ask our bankers to disable our online transfer facility. No such transferring should be allowed. So ask our banker to restrict fund online transfer ability. That was the reason the previous accountant was able to commit a fraud. Second step we can take is why she was able to, because she was the one authorizing and she was the one recording. So we have to implement a strict segregation of duties function. So it's the right wording to use here is segregate the incompatible functions. What are the incompatible functions? The one with custody shouldn't authorize, the one with authorization shouldn't record, and the one with the custody or authority or record keeping shouldn't reconcile. CARR, custody, authority to execute a transaction, record keeping and reconciliation must be done by 4 separate individuals. So segregate the incompatible duties. Incompatible duties. 2 were needed. Let us give more, just 1 more. Since we already have the budget, so we can select some audit expenses and compare them on the budgeted basis. So randomly select expenses and trace them to the accounting records on regular basis, on periodic basis. This will bring out if there's anything wrong going on in the company. Alright, so question 2 is done. Now we can move on to question number 3 by simply clicking 3. So question 3 says, refer to the COSO internal control framework to answer the following questions. A. Identify and describe the 3 objectives of internal control. So those of you who have read COSO internal control framework, they will immediately recall that what the exact wordings for 3 objectives of internal control. It should immediately recall. So guys, these are the 3 interrelated objectives which you can memorize by the word ERC. Everything really counts. ERC, everything really counts. E stands for effectiveness and efficiency of operations. R, reliability of financial reporting. And C stands for compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. In some books, it is written as ORC, means the same. ORC, O stands for operational efficiency and effectiveness. R stands same for reliability of financial reporting, and C for compliance. So it's ERC or ORC, they mean this: effectiveness and efficiency of operation, reliability of financial reporting, compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Now we can type in our responses. The 3 internal control objectives as per COSO model are as follows. First, effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Effectiveness and efficiency of operations. That means operations should be as efficient as possible. 2. Compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. You can give a brief description of this. Efficiency and effective operations means operations should be as efficient, economical and effective as possible. 2. Compliance with applicable laws and regulations. And this you can write: care should be taken to follow and be in compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. Third and the last one, reliability of financial reporting. Reliability of financial reporting. Financial data that forms the basis of your financial statement preparation should be reliable and timely so that it can be useful for management, decision making, and for outsiders as well, or outside users. Management, so there won't be such correction, but I can, since this is not a fully functional exam model. Okay, next, second part. Identify and describe 5 components of internal controls. So I'm sure you people remember the components of internal controls can be memorized by this mnemonic CRIME. If you know this, you will know what I mean. Control procedures, risk assessment, information and communication, monitoring, and control environment. These are the 5 components of internal control framework given by the COSO model. So let me show you exactly from where we have taken this one. See, the COSO internal control framework consists of 5 interrelated components. They can be memorized by the mnemonic called CRIME. C-R-I-M-E. C stands for control procedures or control activities. R for risk assessment. I for information and communication. M for monitoring. And E for control environment. So if you just remember the word CRIME, just like in segregation of duties we have a word CAR, C-A-R-R, custody, authorization, record keeping, and reconciliation. So you can remember these, you can recall quite easily What are the components of COSO model? Interrelated components, that is crime. So you just have to remember these words only, and you know what to write in, what to fill in the space with. So we're going back to the essay type now and fill in our responses. This was your question number 1, or rather A. So you can do this way, and then finally you have the second part to attempt B, and you enter. So identify and describe 5 components of internal controls. We've just seen them. The 5 components of internal controls are as follows. Now we can give a brief description of all. First one is the control environment. That's the foundation. Control environment. We will write brief note on these. Risk assessment. Third, control activities or control procedures. Fourth, information and communication. And last, 5th one is monitoring, whether the controls are working as intended. So you can just give a brief description to convince the examiner you know what you're writing. You don't have to give much more detail, just be brief. Control environment. What is control environment? It sets the tone at the top, or tone of an organization, what the management expects. Influencing, it influences all the people's behavior under working or within the organization. Influencing the control consciousness, control knowledge or control awareness of people. Right? Awareness, organization, no such facility on the real exam, remember. Next is the risk assessment. Risk assessment, what we do in risk assessment, we identify the areas of vulnerabilities where the organization is exposed to danger. So identify and analyze relevant risks as a basis of management. That will be management of risk. Control activities, policies, procedures, detailed of how the internal controls would be conducted. So control the policies and procedures that help ensure that management directives are carried out or the management instructions are followed. Fourth, information and communication. Whether the system is manual or automated, there should be an effective system of information that defines the organizational responsibility, who reports to whom, how the information is captured, processed, which information is applicable to which category of employees. It must be clearly laid down. So you give in your own wordings. Then we have monitoring. Assess the quality, that to what extent the internal control is working. There has to be a regular monitoring by the management. So assess the quality of internal control performance. How are they doing? And then modify accordingly. So assess the quality of internal controls performance over time. So you're done with your question number 3 as well. So once you're done, you can move on to the last question, and as you can see, you have done 3 out of 4. Your 75% work is done. Once you click 4, you will move on to the next question. So the last question, question number 4, identify and explain 3 ways internal controls provide reasonable assurance. Internal control can only provide you reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, because no system of internal control can provide you absolute assurance. There are certain limitations of internal control, because we have to see the cost of control also. That is the reason not we can't construct a control that is costly to implement, but the benefits are limited. So one of the reasons why we have reasonable assurance is that we have to keep our cost of controls low. So the assurance is reasonable. We have to make sure that controls are not such stiff and so not such tight that they will affect our operational efficiency. We want to, like, you need 10 people's signature to get a check signed. It's a very good control, but it will result in inefficiency. It takes more time to run a process. So the two reasons why we have reasonable assurance because of control. The first is we have to keep our cost low, so resultantly we have reasonable assurance, not absolute. And second, we want to be efficient. We don't want to damage our efficiency. So in order not to affect our efficiency, we have to keep our controls relatively flexible. That's why they provide reasonable assurance. So these are the two reasons, the cost, and we do not want to compromise on our efficiency. That's why we have reasonable assurance from the system of internal controls. The question says, identify and explain 3 ways internal controls provide reasonable assurance. So the response would be 3 ways internal controls are designed. Who designed? Management. Who implements? Management. Internal auditors only review, assess their adequacy and efficiency and effectiveness. Internal controls do not design, they do not implement. Management's job is to design and implement system of internal control. 3 ways internal controls are designed to provide reasonable assurance are as follows. 1. Segregation of duties. We have discussed it in detail. Custody, authorization, recording and reconciliation must be done, but be assigned to 4 different people. So assigning different employees to perform functions. Which functions? I'm sure you're aware. Second, reconcile. This is a part of segregation duties as well. Reconciliation of recorded accountability with the asset must be done on regular basis. Third, safeguarding controls, physical access controls. Safeguarding of controls or rather safeguarding controls, that is limiting access to an organization assets to authorized users only or authorized personnel only. Only the authorized individuals are allowed access to such assets, facilities, etc. So guys, that ends your question 4 of essay type 1. If it's your last essay type, there are 2 essay types on the exam, we'll simply press finish. If you still have some time, go back, review your options, what you have done, make any amendments or adjustments, and then simply finish at the close of 4 hours. Good luck.